Imagine the industrial environments and machine enemies of Nier Automata. Now give the player a weapon that looks like it belongs in Gears of War. Then build the entire game around parkour, platforming, and climbing giant mechanical bosses. The game is Motorslice. It's a new action-adventure game from Regular Studio, and while it doesn't do everything perfectly, it has a few ideas that make it stand out from most indie releases. The first thing that stood out to me was how much emphasis the game puts on movement. Motorslice puts a lot of focus on traversing huge industrial environments. You'll spend a surprising amount of time jumping across gaps, climbing structures, looking for routes forward, and trying to reach places that initially seem inaccessible. The parkour isn't as smooth as it could be. Sometimes the controls feel a little awkward, and there are moments where you'll miss a jump because you didn't line yourself up correctly. But oddly enough, that's part of what reminded me of the classic Tomb Raider games. Movement isn't completely automated or effortless. You actually have to think about distances, positioning, and timing. Reaching a platform often feels like solving a small challenge rather than simply pressing forward and watching an animation play out. As a result, exploring the world is engaging. The game's signature mechanic is the motor slice itself. At first glance, it looks like a chainsaw weapon designed for combat, but it's much more important than that. Motor slicing is integrated into almost every part of the game. You'll use it to move through the environment, reach distant platforms, gain height, and interact with various traversal mechanics. The developers clearly wanted the weapon to be more than something you swing at enemies, and that decision gives the game a strong identity. Many action games separate combat and movement into two different systems. Motorslice constantly blends them together. Because of that, getting from one location to another is often just as entertaining as fighting. In fact, I would argue that traversal is where the game is at its strongest. Regular enemy encounters are fine, but they rarely reach the same level of excitement as the platforming sections. Most machine enemies serve as obstacles on your journey rather than memorable combat encounters. The real highlights come later. That's when the giant bosses start appearing. The game features colossal boss encounters spread across 8 chapters, and these are easily the most memorable moments in the entire experience. The bosses immediately reminded me of Shadow of the Colossus. You're not simply standing on the ground and attacking a weak point. Instead, you're climbing across enormous moving machines, trying to stay on them while searching for vulnerable areas. Some of these encounters feel less like traditional boss fights and more like platforming challenges taking place on top of living machinery. The scale works really well. The machines tower above the player, and simply reaching the weak point can be more interesting than the actual damage phase. The game's visual style supports this approach. Motorslice uses a fairly minimalist look. There isn't a huge amount of environmental detail, and some players might find the presentation a little plain. Personally, I think the simplicity works in the game's favor. The environments are extremely readable. Platforms stand out. Traversal routes are easy to identify. Important objects are rarely hidden among visual clutter. In a game where movement is such a major focus, that clarity becomes surprisingly valuable. The world itself is also impressively large. The developers describe it as a massive industrial structure, and that sense of scale comes across throughout the adventure. You're constantly looking upward at giant machinery, distant platforms, and structures that seem far beyond your reach, until you eventually find the path to them. As for the story, it's quite light. There is a narrative involving a worker named P and a floating companion called Orby. Their interactions and dialogue choices often felt a little odd to me, and I never became especially invested in what was happening. The story mostly serves as a reason to move from one area to the next. The music had a similar effect on me. It's not bad, but it doesn't have enough impact. One thing worth mentioning for anyone interested is that Motorslice isn't a huge time commitment. A normal playthrough takes around 10 hours, making it a fairly manageable game to finish over a few evenings or a weekend. It's currently available on PC, PS5, and Xbox Series X and S, and it's also available through Game Pass. Considering its $20 price tag, it feels like a reasonable amount of content for the asking price. And obviously, you can always wait for a sale. Motor Slice isn't a game I would recommend for its story or its combat against regular enemies. But if the idea of parkour, giant machine bosses, industrial exploration, and a chainsaw powered traversal system sounds interesting, Motor Slice is worth checking out.
This is Slicer P. Over.